So I'll give a brief introduction of my work to start. So I'm an artist working in photography and video primarily, and my work often takes the form of kind of sculptural constructions that I build in the studio using found photographs from a lot of historical sources like encyclopedias, history books, archives, and then also from the internet and from the world of kind of advertising and popular imagery. And I usually rephotograph and represent these materials in order to comment on the power structures embedded in the conventions of photographic representation and in the kind of everyday media landscape that we live in, and also in our kind of everyday commodities and objects that we use. And my videos similarly pull from a photographic history and from a more recent history in order to represent familiar imagery. And in all of this, I'm trying to kind of situate a personal, individual approach within the shared visual codes of popular culture, and to kind of talk about how it feels for an actual person to live in this particular moment, and with the sort of accumulation of historical images that we have all in our kind of shared collective brains. I also kind of started as a graphic I started as a graphic designer at the New York Times, and I worked there for 3 years at the beginning of my career, like 10 years ago now. So I'm thinking a lot in my work about how design works and about how so much of the information that we get is filtered through the conventions of design and often of advertising. So those are kind of the big themes of my work. Should I go into red film?
Okay, sorry, I wasn't sure if you were going to show the film now.
No, I'm done. That was my intro.
No, I think that's really helpful just to like bring us into your work a little bit. And so you mentioned that the work's included in Art Basel's OVR red film. About that, like maybe, you know, give people some information about red film, but also how that sort of was the roots of your new work here.
Yeah, so red film here, this is an image of it installed in its most recent iteration at the Approach Gallery in London, where it was up for 2 weeks before it had to close due to COVID. And in this installation, the main film is in the back, and then there are 6 other smaller screens on iPads that are in these custom frames that come out of the walls so that you can watch 7 videos at once. And I originally made red film for the Sao Paulo Biennial in 2018. And it kind of started with thinking about something that had been on my mind for a long time, which is a sort of feeling of endless choice that isn't actually a choice at all, or of living in a world where we have like a constant array of things and ways of being and versions of ourselves to choose from. And this is all presented to us as a sort of freedom or a luxury, but in fact, most of these choices are kind of predetermined and are about kind of conforming and consuming rather than about actually choosing anything. And I didn't really know how to like put my finger on that. I just felt that this was how the world seemed to me. And so I wanted to start working with those ideas and trying to make a video that kind of embodied or reflected the feeling of living like that without actually maybe explicitly being able to talk about it. So the film takes on a kind of looping quality. It repeats the same images and ideas and words over and over again. And it's a critique of this kind of constant pressure to consume under particular dictates and in particular ways. And it kind of questions the effect of this torrent of information and of choice on the self and on an actual person trying to navigate all of it. So I'll just show like a 4-minute excerpt. This is another installation view. And then I'll talk about it a little bit more. This will work.
Task. Okay. I'm talking about American patterns.
And French painters.
And French painters.
Cézanne.
Cézanne, Susan. I'm talking about the new woman, and a pattern which was invisible to the subjects when they lived it. I'm talking about the face. We've seen it all before. A loop.
A loop.
My mobile body makes a difference in the visible world. Who is at the center of vision here? For whom does the world simply open up? All the ideas must be apprehended in a single stroke, and a new image comes with no warning. And don't we all make everything just for one person? Just for one or two? I make it loop.
Right?
As we begin to traverse the field of vision, the tragedy of our partial knowledge lies behind us. Right? The desire to be attractive is inherent and as old as the human race itself. And I thought about the women of antiquity accused of lying for making up their faces. Juvenal calls a woman's made-up face a wound, dark yolk yellow, blood red, which is darker than red. Everybody's concerned with color. I make it for you. The face. The task involves the face and making improvements. What do I need from you in order to complete myself? The task has been to find that thing that is always already addressing us. Blue in the face from telling the story over and over again. Threatening the transparency that characterized the honest man, I was blushing, true feeling in the world. Suddenly, I had the power to make up that blush. Cézanne, Susan. Matisse. You told me you were made up of 1,000 ideas about yourself. You were never allowed to be whole. A sort of fertility available to the image. Reproducing yourself. Remember that all scanners and digital cameras have problems with highly saturated reds. I listened to you about my ability to see from all sides. I told you about the privilege of I told you about the idea of remembering something original, or becoming whole again, hold in a million places. To time. What is remembered in the body is well. Put your hands to mine. All these things to learn. What is remembered in your body is well remembered. I go to make a note and I've already made it. Put your hands to mine.
Right?
A loop. But here, only those aspects of the past that are useful and get remembered. Susan Cézanne. Things could always be otherwise. Paloma. The most recent past becomes distant. A painting worth so much money cannot be ascribed to any particular age or subsumed to any singular rhythm. A common dream of growing larger as in Alice in Wonderland, or on a bill. Is this a woman's dream?
Okay, I was like, when am I gonna end this? It's available to watch on the Approach website if anyone wants to see the whole thing. That was only the first quarter of it. But so the film kind of takes the tone of an educational film. And like I mentioned, it sort of avoids drawing any specific conclusions, but rather tries to kind of articulate in some version how it feels to be human in relation to 21st century media culture, I guess you could say. And it uses several central images or objects to kind of guide the structure of the film. So a Cézanne brand jewelry box, Cézanne brand makeup, a red Mustang from the 1980s that was sort of like once the height of style, but now looks kind of faded. A red Comme des Garçons clothing, a red lipstick. And it combines footage from a makeup factory that I shot and in my studio, and then of the red convertible in a separate photo studio. And it also has a lot of scenes where I'm hanging upside down and speaking through the voice of a male voice actor. I wanted to have these scenes where the kind of inside of my body is pressing on the outside, and I'm becoming sort of more and more uncomfortable as I talk about these themes and ideas, and also to have the kind of sense of perception or where you're located in relationship to the content of the film be sort of confusing or disorienting, which is also a reflection of how the world feels, especially right now. And there are sections that if you go watch the longer thing, you'll come up across where I'm writing in a kind of more manifesto style, sort of like an Instagram caption, which I wanted to write in this kind of declarative, often very narcissistic, sometimes really insightful style that you often see on Instagram captions, particularly from influencers or people who spend a long time on Instagram, and to think about what it means to absorb real information in that way. So it kind of pulls styles of text, styles of speaking, ways of looking from all sorts of different sources, and then kind of loops them over and over again. And yeah, I think that's all I'll say about that. But all of these themes of kind of trying to locate oneself within a world of chaos are coming back in the work that I'm making now.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. I mean, I love the red film, so it's really nice to see an excerpt of it. I think it leads into your work really well for maybe people who are less familiar. And actually, I'm gonna, just based on what you just said, I actually wanted to jump to a later question that I had, because it's so interesting how you think about the individual in relation to sort of the media atmosphere, and how, you know, media outlets, and maybe more specifically social media, how they affect the way we see ourselves, and how, for instance, we're encouraged to conform to a certain way of being, or in contrast to that, maybe, you know, find evidence for any truth that we want to exist. So I'm curious how you think about this in this new work, you know, yourself in relation to all these images.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've been really obsessed with the the word infodemic, or the kind of the idea basically that like our information glut that we, in a kind of 21st century internet accessed Western context, live in, where we can find as much information as we could dream of finding at any given moment, kind of paradoxically doesn't make it easier to figure out what's true or real or important, but actually just makes it possible to find confirmation for any truth we choose to pursue, which I think is like one of the main sources for where we are now, and politically, and I mean just in terms of not being able to grasp what's actually happening in the world. I mean, even I never know if it's just a feeling that it's worse or if it actually is worse, but it definitely feels worse. And yeah, like instead of more knowledge leading to more kind of truth, more knowledge seems to lead to the whole notion of truth being impossible to locate at all. And that's really scary. So that's something that I am kind of thinking about a lot in this new work. And then also the kind of, like I mentioned with the red film, the sort of endless versions of yourself that you can find on Instagram, or on like, or not versions of yourself, but options for potential versions of yourself.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask quickly if you can make me the host again.
Oh yeah.
And I just, for people that have come more recently into the conversation, Please feel free to ask questions in the chat. We're going to address questions at the end of the talk, if there are some. So I wanted to talk more about the specific works now that are on view in the Art Basel viewing room. And also for those who have just joined us, you can link to look at the images and to other works by Sara. I put the link in the chat of this Zoom talk. So maybe we can talk about the visual references in your new photo collages. You know, you made all these works in 2020. So where did you source them, and how did you think about putting them together maybe differently this year than you have before?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you can still see my screen, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, so these pictures started as in red film, kind of working through an overwhelming volume of materials, and thinking particularly in terms of the pandemic, of the kind of difficulty of locating a position against all of this. And my first intention was to kind of reproduce a sense of chaos I wanted to start by making one image that kind of embodied a feeling of chaos, which I think is one of the operative words of our time. So I was working with my kind of personal archive that I have in the studio, which pulls a lot from the internet, from also like a more recently kind of modernist history. And I kind of start with all this stuff in the studio. And there were a few like particular images I really wanted to think about. I found these pictures of this swimmer character who's wearing the bathing cap here and who comes in again here and here, on Turbo Squid, which is online, I'm sure many people are familiar with it, but it's an online repository of kind of 3D animated characters that are, you know, totally digitally rendered, and then you can animate them yourself and kind of decide how you want them to move. So I wanted to begin with the swimmers, and I was thinking a lot about kind of bodies mutantizing and how we're thinking a lot more about our bodies than we maybe did before, and how that kind of ties into a lot of these themes of capitalism that I've been talking about, the way that kind of the optimist progress narratives of capitalism sort of ignore that illness even exists for the most part, but suddenly they have to acknowledge these things, hence all the, in these unprecedented times, advertising that we are inundated with right now, and the kind of commodification of COVID that's happening. And so I wanted to start pulling kind of images of bodies, of sort of idealized, not even real bodies, as in the swimmers, and then of sort of more vulnerable bodies. So I have also another picture I made of a fawn hiding for protection, and then I've collaged in other images of more kind of dangerous, sinister things.
Oh, that's a great shot.
The White House, Wall Street. and sorry. Oh, am I echoing?
You were just in the last little bit,
okay.
But you're okay now.
Okay, and then I also wanted to I wanted to mix, I also have like some disembodied body parts or like disconnected body parts, and I wanted to mix these kind of references to the body with more kind of sinister, threatening elements. And then I also have like pictures of crying, bodies leaking. I have several reproductions of this William Hogarth painting from 1798 called Before After. It's on the right side here, which essentially depicts the before and after of a sexual assault. And then I have other types of before and after kind of transformation pictures, like Katy Perry's before and after Photoshop. and I was thinking of vulnerability in that sense too, like these kind of celebrities where we can inspect their faces and sort of see through their attempts to live up to these ideals that they're supposed to look like. And the kind of vulnerability inherent in being seen that much on the internet, but also thinking about the way that narratives of imperfection and then working towards perfection or before and after feed a lot of the optimism of capitalism, or that makes kind of capitalism run. So we kind of both are maybe hurt or I don't know, oppressed is maybe a strong word, but I would potentially use that word, by these kind of narratives of constant self-improvement, but we also sort of need them to feel connected to the world, or at least, I don't know if I can speak in the we, but I'm sort of describing how it feels to me and thinking that it probably applies in other contexts too. And then, so I mean, describing the particular images, sometimes I feel like it kills it, but I was trying to bring together all these sorts of references to the body and to the way that we feel sort of inundated with options, like in red film. And then I also was thinking about the swimmers and about sort of being surrounded by this type of imagery without ever being able to rest or to locate a fixed position. So I was also working with these pictures of models that I took before COVID, and they're these models from essence.com, which is a big online fashion site. And the models are sort of photographed like robots, like in this 1, 2, 3 position. And I've been sort of obsessed with this type of photography and also with getting the models in my studio and photographing them on my own terms. So this is a picture of Sahara, but I couldn't get her in the studio now, obviously. So I built a set and re-photographed an existing negative of her that I had printed, and then added these new elements of the snakes and the swimmers kind of swirling around her. And the last thing I'll say about the kind of influences for the specific images that I pulled for this body of work is that I read Susanna Zuboff's book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, at the beginning of COVID, and that has been something I've been thinking about every single day. And it's about, in a nutshell, the way that certain big corporations, Google, Facebook, Amazon, have kind of monetized all of our online activity, and that we kind of are compelled to participate, or participation is imperative for a lot of people, and we sort of can't escape this world where we're constantly surveyed and seen. And she uses this beautiful term, glass life, towards the very end of the book, where she says we're sort of living in a glass life, by which she means that even our most private spaces are now infiltrated by eyes and screens and cameras. So I was also thinking, I guess, of a fishbowl and of like someone who is sort of on a stage, and then trying to hide from those sorts of forces and the contradictions between like the outside world kind of constantly swirling around you, even when you're inside your own private space or your own private mind.
Yeah, and I think the last image you showed with that Sahara was in, that you mentioned, I think is such a good also example of everything you just said, but also about this sort of like positioning oneself and within sort of like this capitalist consumerist world that we have to interface with exclusively digitally for quite a few months. And I sort of see that in, you know, she has a very strong gaze, but there is a sort of negotiation, it seems like, of a lot swirling around her.
Yeah. Nice.
And then the other image that you included in this, so also, I guess we should say that the work that you made for Art Basel, it can be shown as one installation, but it can also be considered into individual works. And one of the images, Guts is what I'm thinking of, is quite a bit different than the other ones, in that it focuses more centrally on one image. So I was wondering if you can speak to that, because there is also that aspect of your practice where you sort of centralize one image.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to have a break from the craziness of the other pictures, and I was sort of thinking very long and hard about what that break should be. This is a still from some video I made in March or April of the kind of aftermath of a sheep that was slaughtered by someone I know, and I asked if I could film it, which is, you know, sort of brutal, but I've been thinking more and more about kind of showing the inside of the body, or about, like, it kind of connects to the glass life idea, that like even the inside of the body is on the outside. I was thinking, for example, about something I learned, that x-rays of Marilyn Monroe's chest were sold at auction after she died, like that even the inside of her body was up for sale and up for view. I found this heart surgery footage on eBay that is in the first picture. Here, it's at the bottom, near the Pinocchios. And I was thinking about like how deeply invasive it is that you could buy a picture of someone's guts, and also that someone's surgery is available online, but how, like, what an apt metaphor it is for the way we live now. So I wanted to have one kind of break moment where the inside of a body was depicted. And I mean, these guts, they're like quite gross, but also really beautiful and textured. And yeah, I was sort of obsessed with the footage. I was also thinking about how, like, the kind of long cultural myth that you can know anything about the outside of a person by looking at the inside, which is something that red film touches on a lot, and how that myth is the basis for a lot of the kind of long-standing misogyny and racism in our culture, and how it's sort of like a very simple thing that seems to need to be said again and again, that the inside of the body is the same for everybody. I mean, not to sound too much like I'm on Sesame Street or something, but like I was thinking a lot about like inside versus outside, and the way that we think we know anything by looking at the outside of somebody, and the kind of the way that there's such a hold on outside image, and the way that images of our outsides travel as well, and kind of get replicated and repeated and show up in all sorts of places, and the inside is never thought about as much, but now we're all intimately aware of the functionings of the insides of our bodies and what can go wrong. I don't know if that was like sort of a rambling response. I just made these 7 days ago, as I mentioned, so I'm sort of still really in my head about them, but
I was just thinking, I was really glad I just asked that question, because it offers a lot of insight into it. It was something I was really looking forward to asking you, and there is a lot of layers to that, and it also almost subverts the other works, which are so concerned with the exterior. So there is a sort of stillness to it, like an organic kind of break in the rest of the works too.
Yeah, I think just also from a formal perspective, it's important to have some kind of breathing moments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I also wanted to ask you, you've mentioned before how you're interested in how images are collected sort of on a daily basis by most of us, but then not revisited. So there's this sort of archive that we create that we don't revisit. So I was just wondering how this might have affected the way you made these works as you were sheltering in place, because presumably you were limited in terms of what you were able to photograph, and if you went back into your own archive.
Yeah, this I think is one of the big silver linings of COVID, and it's something that I kept telling my students when I was teaching during the height of COVID in March and April, just that it's an amazing opportunity to make work from your computer or to kind of go back and look at everything we've saved. Another one of the symptoms of being alive right now with a smartphone is that we just constantly archive and save and screenshot and take pictures, and no human would ever have time to go back and look at everything that they've collected. And so what does it mean to have this kind of existential impulse to save and to document if you can never revisit any of what you've collected? I mean, I have 68,000 photos in my iPhoto. I don't even know, is that a lot? I don't know how many other people have, but I'll never be able to look at all of them or any of them really. And I actually try to sit down once every couple of weeks and do it. Yeah, I think it's, I don't know, like because of the ease of saving something digitally, we just save and save and save and never reflect. And so I think this is a great opportunity to do that. I've also been really excited about thinking of, you know, what would it look like to make a longer film that's only made out of the contents of my computer, or even things like re-photographing a photograph I already have, which is like sort of a process that I've used in the past, but specifically this version of reanimating pictures of models by reusing old pictures, I think is something I wouldn't have done before this moment, and I'm glad I figured that out. And yeah, I also think there's something nice about having a practice where the same images and objects kind of resurface again and again. And so, yeah, I feel like everyone would be well served to go back and look at some of the stuff that they've saved.
Yeah, and that, I mean, it sort of seems like almost a metaphor too of the way we look at time and history, and how, you know, there is a sort of assumption sometimes that we're just moving forward and there's not a need to, or there's not value, let's say, in looking back, particularly if we're thinking about the political climate, which thinks about the past in a very absurd way, and as something that we're not connected to. So it's interesting to think about having a more cyclical approach to your own archive in the day-to-day.
Yeah, like, I mean, so much of the Make America Great Again is kind of relying on a myth of an American past that never really existed. And so I think, yeah, like if we could go back and see that more clearly, it might change some things in the present, of course, and the past is just whatever version of it the people in power get to save. But obviously one of the great things, like I've talked a lot about the kind of negative feelings of being alive with the internet and with social media right now, but also obviously like access to the historical record has opened up to everyone, and access to the pictures that everybody sees is much more, you know, possible for regular people. And that is the good side of the fact that anyone can make something that reads as a purveyed truth, or as something that has an authority that maybe it shouldn't. So again, it's just too complicated to even put your finger on.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, yeah, I mean, I think we could talk about that for a whole other hour. I do have another question, but I also want to just say that, you know, put it out there. People can put up their hands or write a question into the chat. Now is a good time. And we can ask Sarah, but in the meantime, I'm gonna ask one more question, which is maybe you can speak about, just from your perspective in creating this new work for Art Basel, if you can explain the way you think about you know, having it as a singular installation versus individual works? What made you make that choice?
Yeah, I'm trying to start making a whole kind of series of works on these red grids that are individual pictures. Like I think this one that we're looking at right now really stands as an individual picture and says something on its own, but that can also kind of fit together to make a longer narrative throughout different moments and like focuses on different pictures, like the guts, the fun, and then the kind of chaos of this larger set. And I think when they're all together, you sort of get a sense of the feeling of having a maybe like a small pause and then suddenly getting inundated with information and then flowing into another kind of mode of looking after that. Yeah, I wanted to have a kind of temporal register, but that can also be sort of looked at for as long or as short as the viewer chooses. Yeah, and I am sort of trying to make a bigger project that fits into one thing at the end of it. And I like the kind of openness of working in that way. And I like working on grids because I'm a graphic designer.
Yeah.
Because it kind of allows for, like when you're working with an archive and you're kind of, and like I said, when you can take 68,000 pictures with your phone in the last 3 years, it can get very difficult to sift through everything. So I like making these grids and then sort of seeing what fits in them and what configuration kind of comes out of working on that particular structure. Otherwise, it's much too overwhelming to contend with the kind of materials.
Yeah, thank you. That's so interesting. Well, I think that's a good place to end. There actually are no questions, which I'm really surprised about, but that's fine. I asked you a million. So just to let everyone know, if you want more information about Sara's work, you can email us at the gallery. I put the email address in the chat. It's info@cooperpoolgallery.com. And you can also look at Sara's online viewing room for Art Basel as well. So thank you, Sara. It was super good to talk to you. It was really enlightening.
Thanks. Also, you can watch Red Film on the Approach website. I'm going to take it down soon, but I'll keep it up for a few more days so that people can see it.
Right. That's great. Okay, cool. All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Okay, have a good day. Bye, Sara.
Bye.
Bye.